Hey there, my name is Harry Kuperstein. I am part of Fetsch Lab in the Krieger Mind Brain Institute. We are a neuroscience lab that does work on decision making, and my project is called Using Confidence in Noisy Sequential Hierarchical Decisions. So that's a mouthful. Let's break down exactly what that means. So there's a two-stage task involved in our experiment. The first stage is a value option in which you choose one of two options indicated by dots in this diagram. You choose whichever one you believe will give you the higher average output. And then in the second stage, it's a perceptual task. So in this example at least, you're given a patch of moving dots, which is either moving left or right, and there's noise injected, so it's a little bit difficult to test exactly or tell exactly what direction the dots are moving. But you'll make an isocod in the direction that you believe the dots are moving onto one of these two bars, and the bars indicate confidence. And so you're simultaneously judging both the direction of the dots and how confident you are that you've done so, meaning how confident you are that you are going to be correct on this trial, that you've accurately judged the direction of the dots. And then finally, what you're going to get is a reward. More on this in a second. But just to show what the actual data looks like, this is a subject doing the task in our lab. And you'll see that the subject started out choosing right and then switched to left. And then afterwards, on this red trial, meaning a poor feedback, the trial switched back. And for the most part, was selecting the right option. This shows that the subjects can actually do our task and to some extent accurately choose the correct option over time. And other data has shown that as well. Just to go into a little more task specifics so you can get an idea of what we mean by noisy feedback and what we mean by a sequential decision. This is the structure of the task over here. First, you see an option stage where you either choose left or right, and at any moment in time, only one of these is going to be correct, and in this example, the right option is correct. And then after that choice, you'll move on to the perceptual stage where you're given a stimulus, let's say a patch of moving noisy dots, and you have to perceive that stimulus and then choose whether it's left or right, and whether you're correct on that or wrong determines which environment or reward distribution you end up in. If you're right on both, you end up in a high feedback distribution. If you're right on one and wrong on the other, you end up in a medium feedback distribution. And if you're incorrect on both, you end up in the low feedback. And the distributions are listed here. There's a low one centered on a mean reward of 5, a medium one centered on a reward of 10, and a high one centered on a mean of 15. And the important thing here is that these are distributions. They're not binary or discrete rewards, meaning that for any reward that's high, you may get something as high as 20, or you may get something as low as 10. And so what that means practically for subjects doing this task is that they will need to sample a certain option a few times to really get a sense of what it may be. Or there's other things you can do to try and discern which option is correct quicker. One of those things, namely, is confidence. How confident are you that you got the perceptual task right? If you have 100% confidence in the perceptual task, then you have a much better idea of knowing whether you're in the correct option or not. Of course, these reward distributions are a bit noisy, and given that, you may need to sample a few more times, but you should still be able to figure out exactly what option is correct if you're 100% confident. And so we hypothesize that subjects may be using confidence in some way to better guide their decisions throughout this task. First, I just want to show that on data we collected on this very task, subjects could use the graded feedback, meaning these distributions of reward, to better make decisions. You can see that for each reward increase, there's almost a monotonic decrease in the probability of switching. Subjects were really happy with these 14 to 20 high rewards, and they were very unhappy with these 0 to 6 low rewards. And this, of course, on the left is the probability of switching on the next trial to a different option. And you can see that, yes, there's a very high probability of switching for these low rewards. Somewhere in the middle, there's about at chance for whether you switch or not, and then subjects were content to take these high rewards. And so with that, I also want to show that subjects could accurately report their confidence on the perceptual stage. What we're seeing down here is the motion strength of the perceptual stimulus given by the coherence, or the amount of, or the percentage of dots that are moving in a coherent direction. This is showing that about 50% of dots were moving in a coherent direction here, which ends up being a stimulus, in my experience, that is very easy to discriminate, and subjects almost always get it right in the behavioral data. And we can see that there's a high self-reported confidence of about 0.8, so maybe 80% confident. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, a stimulus with zero coherence, meaning that dots are just all moving randomly, you simply have to guess, subjects were still pretty unconfident here. They marked their confidence at a little below 0.5 or 50%. If we're judging confidence to mean the probability that you're correct, well, they're estimating that they're at chance, and in that they would be correct. But the point is here that subjects were able to more or less accurately report their confidence according to the motion strength, which bodes well for them actually being able to use this information informatively in later aspects of the task. This graph here is more or less suggesting that confidence may play some role in their decision making. What we're seeing here is that on trials where they were faced with a perceptual error, they had a much lower probability of switching than on trials where they were correct on the perceptual stage. Now, why is that exactly? Hard to say. It could be confidence, some element of confidence on these correct trials, showing that if they are certain that they were correct on that trial, and they're more likely to be correct for an easier stimulus in which they'd be more confident, they have a much higher probability of switching. Whereas if there's still some uncertainty about how they did on that stimulus and they really don't know, it may not be wise for them to switch quite yet. They might want to keep collecting data on that specific stimulus, because with an error here, it's hard to know exactly whether it's the option that's wrong or they were wrong on the perceptual. And so it seems like subjects chose to stay longer in that option or that environment if they got an error. And the data fit the model pretty well in terms of what subjects should be doing on this task. We developed a bounded accumulation model based off of prior work in the field of switching, and we incorporated both confidence in this model, subject-reported confidence, as well as a hazard rate, which kind of captures subjects' desire to switch quicker if they've been in an environment longer. Now, this is purely just a model with simulated data. But what it shows is that on each trial, they may, if they get a feedback that is suboptimal, start accumulating evidence towards a switch. And if they accumulate enough evidence in this switching variable, they'll switch. And so here's the subjects sticking with one environment for about 17 trials until they decide to switch here. And they're switching because this switching variable has crossed the switching bound in yellow. And so they've begun to choose differently. And what you can see here is that this model accurately predicts where the data is being generated from. You can see that the environment was at first the correct one they were choosing, and then it switched, and just one trial after it switches, they've switched as well. You can also see that there was a false switch here where a subject, after being in this environment for quite some time, may have gotten a little jumpy and switched when the switching variable crossed the bound. But they quickly switch back once the feedback stops going their way. And of course, I should mention, I say subject, but this is a computational model generating the data and incorporating it. But I would expect similar results for an actual subject doing the task. And so we don't have a different model or different benchmark model on this task, purely because this is kind of a novel task to compare this model's performance on. But given our attempts to fit reinforcement learning models to the same task, This model is a lot better at sensing these abrupt shifts in reward contingencies, which do happen in the task, where we switch which option is better on them after some time. And they do a better job of those models than at detecting the switches. So the COVID pandemic happened, and we could no longer collect enough data on this task in our lab to confirm our hypotheses and do further work. And so now what to do? We can port the experiment to a platform called Amazon Mechanical Turk. Amazon Mechanical Turk is a platform where you can code experiments in JavaScript, host them on HTML pages, and then workers within the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform can see your task listed and can do it, and you can get data from these people, and you pay them through the platform. It's nice because it's easy to meet these willing subjects. You don't have to do any outreach. They'll come to you. They'll do your task. The data comes directly to you, and you don't have to actually supervise anything. The data can also come in quickly because there are so many workers willing to do these tasks. Of course, a pro right now is that it's remote, and really that's all that's possible right now. And being able to actually collect data on this task during these times, in my opinion, is a very good thing. There's also a framework established for exporting data from the Mechanical Turk output into MATLAB, which is how we do our analyses. And so from a practical standpoint, it's very nice. The cons, of course, are that you lose precision without using our in-lab setup. In the lab, we have a very high hertz monitor, which can display visual stimuli without a problem. We also have an eye tracker that can track eye movements very quickly so that you can get accurate measures of things like reaction time. And with that, some measurements on the Mechanical Turk platform will lose their reliability, such as reaction time. I would not want to use reaction time given subjects may be, using a laptop with a trackpad to make their decisions, and that is way slower than simply moving your eye to a target, which can take just a few milliseconds to do, whereas with a trackpad that may take almost up to a second. We also must simplify the stimulus, given that many subjects are going to be using many different kinds of devices to do our task. So no longer can we use a patch of moving dots, which has a really good established framework for testing accumulation of evidence in that task. Instead, we must use some other kind of stimulus and make some assumptions about how subjects may be using that stimulus and how confidence may be generated as they evaluate that stimulus and try to make decisions with it. But it's doable, I believe. This is an example of an actual playable or testable experiment on Amazon Mechanical Turk. It is, you may recognize it, Flappy Bird. The Flappy Bird has to jump through a bunch of Gabor patches, which are used in orientation discrimination research, which I found kind of fun. But the point here is that you can code pretty complex tasks. I would call Flappy Bird complex. And you can code pretty complex tasks within the Amazon Mechanical Turk interface. And our task should certainly be doable to code. And then from there, you can actually collect data. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of touch on exactly what we're doing now, given that the work on this project has been disrupted for the time being, and how we plan on possibly working around it and hoping to find or make some kinds of conclusions from this task or a similar, more simplified task remotely. And hopefully you find that interesting, or if you're trying to do something similar, perhaps this may be an option for you as well. I hope you can check out this platform if you're interested. There's plenty of kinds of tutorials in case you are. So in terms of what we want to do with this task in the future, we want to refigure the task to simplify it a bit. We actually need to code the experiment, which I've begun doing, and then once it's done, we need to collect data and sort of reanalyze the results and perhaps compare it to the early data that we had in the lab to see whether subjects are doing what we thought they might be doing. And then from there, we can evaluate how that's looking and move forward with actually trying to draw some conclusions from this data. So I want to thank my mentor, Dr. Chris Fetsch, for all his help on this. And I also want to thank Xin Yi Hung. She contributed data analysis, and actually worked on the model of this task and produced the figure on slide 6, and as well as the model that generated the figure on slide 7. So thank you to them.